Ahoy and welcome to Hero Builds, where I'll be going over a few of my casual gamer playstyle builds on Heroes of the Storm. I'll be starting off with Tyrael, as you can see. Now, for me personally, I find Tyrael a pretty strong frontline tank anyway, but he does have his flaws, which I will be going over with you. But the aim of the build I'll be using is to sort of show that he can become quite a bit more tanky. So just going over his abilities, you've got Eldarune's Might. This is basically a teleport with a bit of a slow effect thrown into it. I don't really tend to use it as damage dealer, I tend to use it as a get out of jail free card. Secondly, we have Righteousness. Now this is the ability that I tend to build around, and this does make him quite tanky. It's effectively a shield that can also be passed to your allies. You then have Smite. This is a pretty good way to catch up and close the ground just to finish off those straggling enemies, and it can do some pretty nifty damage. His passive we won't go into. You have to die in order to use it, so we won't be covering that. Judgment is pretty good. I don't tend to use it as an engagement. I tend to use it to save a life. I'll put my Q down, dart in to split up the enemy, and then teleport back to my Q, saving an ally. And Sanctification is a really strong ability. The only downside for me is it has a really short range, and generally speaking in a team fight your allies do tend to be spread out. As for the talents, I go for the Regeneration Orb one, just to help increase the health regeneration because we will be shielding a lot, as well as going for Basic Attacks Heal at level 4 just to keep you up with your health regen. It does help a little bit. For your level 7, this is a key one. You want an increase in your shield as well as decrease in the cooldown, because this is where a lot of your healing will come from, especially at level 13. At level 10, this depends entirely on you as to what heroic you use. I tend to go for Judgment as it's got a smaller cooldown. Again, I do not use it to engage in a fight, I use it to save a teammate if needed. By putting a Q down, you dive in and then teleport back. This is the key one. You want the one that heals every time your shield is struck. This is pretty much how the build works. Keeping that shield up, keeping that healing going, you basically become an uber tank. And for your level 16, it really does depend. If there are a lot of team fights happening, which should be going on at this point, you want the one that increases your shield for the more enemies that are in range. However, Blood for Blood is a really strong ability if you find that you are being focused. It does just generally help with your overall survivability, as well as just take down a few more, or at least decrease the threat level of some higher priority targets. Now for your final ability or talent, it is completely dependent on you. The bottom two is where you want to go, whether it be to make all of your teammates invulnerable within range for a short period of time, or if you quite simply want to do more damage, so you either want to go with 3 or 4. I tend to go with Nexus Blades because having a little bit more damage by this point is a better option, and adding the decreased cooldown of Righteousness from the talents you've already picked does seem to just negate the use of the third talent. Right. Admittedly, this gameplay is split into sections just to sort of show how I play him. Like it's not really too dissimilar from your average tank. I've just helped make him a little bit tankier, adding in the fact that I have a support character with me. It does generally help quite well, and you can generally push quite easily just simply by outlasting your opponent. Now there is a severe downside to this. You are lacking desperately in damage. You've got some pretty good mobility to catch up with them by use of your Q as well as your E. Just passing over the sigil gives an increase in movement speed, as well as if the enemy passes over it, it does slow them down. But the general gist of this is keep your W up at all times. So the main flaw will be that you will run out of mana pretty darn quick. Now the general idea behind the talents that I have picked is that you progressively just become more and more tanky. You're not so much as a threat as a damage dealer. You are simply there to help buff your teammates with a shield, as well as tank yourself out and heal yourself as often as possible. Generally speaking, I would say try not to worry too much about your health unless you are on cooldown for righteousness. That's your W ability. You are generally able to take out, or at least take on, most things. You possibly won't be able to deal enough damage to take out some other tanks, but generally speaking, you can outdo an assassin just for the simple fact that as soon as you press W, they heal you. And adding in the fact that your basic attacks heal you, this should sustain you long enough for you to get your W back up and running. If you are in a direct conflict with an assassin, try not to use your other abilities, just spend all of your mana on keeping your W as active as possible so you have as much uptime as you can. Hopefully either you can then take out the assassin or you will get an ally to your aid that can help you take these out for you. You are amazingly resilient, although I will stress you are not an immortal god. Just because you're an archangel doesn't mean you can't die, so there will be times when you are pressured at this point. You will need to know when to back off and generally save your own skin. It's always better to be out of the fight for 10 seconds while you heal than it is to stay in the fight and die and be put on the death cooldown for a lot more than 10 seconds, obviously. Now, generally speaking, and I am aware of this, Tyrael is one of the more unliked warriors or tanks within Heroes of the Storm. I can kind of see why, because his passive is completely redundant, as well as the fact that he does have a bit of a mixed match toolkit. He acts a little bit like an assassin and a little bit like a support, just with a larger health pool, so he's not really much of anything. If anything, I would say he could possibly fit into that multi-class that has come along, but that's just me. Some of the more elite players among you that if you end up watching this will probably think I'm talking out my arse, but hell, we've all got an opinion. I'm entitled to share mine, so you can call me a dick in the comments below. But generally speaking, I find that with this build he does work quite well and he can push quite well. Like I keep saying, he isn't a damage dealer. He is a tank, but possibly not the best tank. However, with this build I do find he does push that little bit further, and since using this particular build with him, he has fast become my favourite tank. Now, in this clip that I am showing here, it does run for a little bit longer than the rest of them. I'm basically going to push this lane. Now, I will admit I do get the Zerg to come and help me out, but I basically just decide I'm going to go on a suicide run on this lane just to see how much I can actually take while pressuring it up from the base level all the way up to as high as I can get before I friggin' die. A few mistakes are made and I do get pressured back quite a bit, but in general I am able to keep up the pressure back on the opponent and keep pushing forward. But I do hope for those that are looking for Tyrael, maybe trying a different build, hoping this helps you out. If not, maybe it just gives you a little bit of a substantial way to sort of bear him while you just get him to level 5 or 10 just for that extra 500 gold or maybe even a loot chest. I do find this build quite worthwhile, and I do also find it quite supportive in a way because of the upkeep you can have on your W righteousness. It does generally help keeping up the survivability of your overall teammates, particularly if you use sanctification in those big fights. Generally try and use it towards the end of it when everyone's running low on health, or when you're trying to back out of the fight because you've got completely bummed. Anyway, like I said, I'm going to stop talking now, so enjoy the rest of the show.